This is the Chewing the Cud podcast, conversations for the dairy industry, produced in the southwest of England and listened to around the world. Hello and welcome to Chewing the Cud podcast. My name's Andrew Jones and with me as always is...
Sarah Bolt.
How are you doing, Sarah?
I'm very well, thank you, Andrew. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. Now, Sarah and I said we weren't going to talk about the weather, but I am going to say is, let's be honest, still dry out there. That might have changed by the time this comes out, but I very much doubt that. So just keep looking after yourselves with all this weather and keep yourselves hydrated, etc. But otherwise, on to today's podcast. Well, we thought it was due a follow-up from the one we did with Laura Tennant back in June 2023, which until very recently has always been our most popular episode. So we caught up with a couple of Laura's colleagues.
So I guess things have changed, come on a bit since 2023, Andrew. We're now 2020.
You're talking about the milk powders, Sarah?
Both milk powders and perhaps your podcast.
Well, I must admit, before we recorded this one, I listened back to the one we did with Laura, and the sound quality to me is just awful. I cringed listening back to it. So if that's the only one anyone's ever listened to, please, I hope it's improved when you listen to this one. I know it's improved by the time you get to listen to this, but I mean that was back in our first year, and things have obviously moved on since then.
Things have moved on, and kit has been purchased, and
and skills learnt, and all these sorts of things that help improve the production. So
all very professional these days, Andrew.
Oh, I wouldn't quite go that far. But yes, so today we're talking to a couple of Laura's colleagues. There's been some advancements in milk powder technology in the last couple of years. So while we do talk about some of the basics, we're more talking about what's been going on in the last 3 years. Let's go take a listen.
Farming today is a constant balance, rising costs, tighter margins, and a need to get more from every input. At Kemin, we understand the complexity you manage every day. As a family-owned company, we've built our business on helping producers operate more efficiently and with greater confidence. That's why we work alongside you, delivering science-backed solutions that support performance, protect feed quality, and optimize results across your operation. Kemin helps you turn today's challenges into measurable progress that drives long-term profitability.
This episode is brought to you by Chewing the Cud Limited, completely independent, practical nutrition advice for the dairy and beef industries. Whether you need nutrition support, cow signals advice and training, or ROMS accredited mobility scoring, we tailor the advice to your farm and your requirements. For the full range of services, visit www.chewingthecud.com or email nutrition@chewingthecud.com. This episode is also brought to you by Chewing the Cud Limited. We now offer first aid training designed for agriculture and farming, delivered by a registered first aid at work trainer and experienced minor injuries practitioner. For more details, visit www.chewingthecud.com or email training@chewingthecud.com. Hello, I'm Andrew Jones.
And I'm Sarah Bolt.
Sarah's time today is kindly brought to you by Kingshay. And together we bring you the Chewing the Cud podcast, kitchen table conversations for the dairy industry.
Whether you're a farmer, advisor, processor, or anywhere else in the supply chain, we have topics and episodes that will interest you.
We cover the practical and technical aspects of dairy farming.
We want to make you think about what you're doing and ask yourself whether it could be done differently.
Each episode we speak with specialists from inside and outside the industry about their area of expertise.
Subscribe and listen for free on your favourite podcast platform.
Or sign up at www.chewingthecud.com for episode notifications so you never miss a release.
You'll find links to all our socials there too, including our Instagram, Chewing the Cud Podcast, all one word and no G.
Or get in touch directly at podcast@chewingthecud.com.
If you enjoy what we do, please share it and leave us a review.
Enjoy today's episode. Hello and welcome back to Tune the Cud podcast. Today we're going to look at calf milk replacers again, a bit of an update from some of Laura's colleagues. Now, obviously, Laura spoke to us at the end of season 1, so that's a long time ago now. But today we are joined by Georgina Thomas, who is Young Animal Feeds Technical Sales Manager. Hello, Georgina.
Hello.
And also by Dr Juliette Wilms, who is a researcher for Trouw Nutrition. Hello, Juliette.
Hello.
Thank you both for joining us. As I say, I know since we spoke to Laura, there's been some exciting technical updates regarding development of milk powders. So we're here to talk about some of that today. But before we do, like usual, let's find out a little bit about both our guests. So Georgina, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Thanks, Andrew. My name's Georgina Thomas. As you said, I'm the Young Animal Feed Technical Sales Manager for Europe and Central Asia within Trouw Nutrition. I've worked for Trouw Nutrition for around 10 to 15 years now in a number of different roles. I was a graduate at the University of Nottingham from animal science. I entered the feed industry and worked for a feed compounder for a few years before joining Trouw. At Trouw, I worked in sort of technical roles, so nutrition-based roles, and it was there really that my passion for calf and heifer rearing started. So at that point, I was doing a bit of ruminant technical on a number of different topics, but it was actually in 2020 that I started to focus purely on calf and heifer as a sort of a niche topic. I'm really lucky at Trouw Nutrition. We have, as you will see, hopefully, as we go through this podcast, we have a huge amount of exciting research. We are very privileged to have our lifestyle platform. So for me, it's kind of translating that cutting edge research into practical calf rearing tools, protocols, and things that we can do on farm. Even the best calf rearers, there are marginal gains to be had. And I think we'll probably all agree that calf rearing's changed over the last 10 or 15 years. There's a huge amount of noise out there, and we should really be focusing on published evidence-based research. And that's what Juliette and her team do brilliantly. And hopefully we can talk a little bit more about today.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And Juliette, yourself?
So my name is Juliette Wilms. I'm French. I studied in AgroParisTech in Paris, and then I started to work for Trouw Nutrition R&D in the Netherlands right after my degree. In my first five years, I was focusing mostly on calf diarrhea and oral rehydration solutions, and then I shifted to work full-time on milk replacer composition. And I did my PhD with the University of Guelph under the supervision of Mike Steele on the fat composition and the fat inclusion in milk replacer for calves. And it's been about 10 years that I have been working for Trouw Nutrition R&D as a ruminant researcher.
I would say that's probably a lot of fun and quite interesting at times, isn't it? Sorry, I should just say Juliette nodded her head because obviously people can't see, but that's no worries. Yes, so today we spoke to Laura a couple of years ago and I listened back to it yesterday in a bit of preparation for this. And I mean, one of the comments from Laura is she said, I wish we'd talk about it as feed for immunity and feed for health. And I'm guessing that's really what we want to sort of continue with some of today's message, isn't it? Is where you say there's a lot of things happened. You know, it used to be you fed 2 litres twice a day and that was it. Times have moved on. There's definitely been an argument because I remember having that discussion with Laura about from others in the industry, like there's been a push to feed more and others are saying you should feed less. I mean, if we take a snapshot of where we are today, where would you say we've come in the last, like you say, 5-10 years? And then we can go forward as to, you know, what are the latest developments and like you say, some of the research that Juliette has done.
Yeah, I'll kick off, Juliette, if you like. So I think you're completely right, Andrew. I think the calf nutrition space has massively changed in the last 10 or 15 years. And I think even since Laura spoke to you, I think there's been massive changes in the last 3 years. We obviously know calf and milk replacers are ultimately completely connected to farm gate milk price. So also, which I'm sure we'll discuss at some point during the podcast, The ups and downs of the market bring its challenges as well. But ultimately, when you look at where research has come and where research is going, it's trying to now look at the long-term benefits and feeding our calves properly, and trying to look at long-term return on investment as well. So when we look at what we're trying to talk about now, and this is where some of Juliette's research is super interesting, is we're trying to move from growth-focused feeding to resilience-focused nutrition. And so we're trying to take it beyond growth now. Growth is really important. It will always be important, calf nutrition, but we can actually achieve a lot more. And when you look back at levels of feeding, I think there was huge amounts of improvements to be done there. I mean, us as Trouw Nutrition, we did some sort of market research a few years ago. And just for the UK, we found out that 65% of farmers were feeding 6 litres or less. And when you look at 6 litres of a traditional milk replacer, you're going to be struggling to cover maintenance and growth. You're not going to ever be achieving those growth targets that you want to.
Well, as a comparison, what would a calf naturally drink if it was on its mother?
So naturally, a calf that is raised by the dam would drink above 10 to 12 liters per day, which is equivalent to 20% of their birth body weight as ingested volume per day. And in the industry, it's very common to feed them less than half. So this is really problematic for their development, but also for their immunity. And the other big difference is that in nature, the calves will have a very gradual weaning transition, and they can stay with the dam up to 10 months of age, while in the industry, by 3 months, they are weaned. If they are lucky, in some countries, they will be weaned extremely early. And we know that the weaning transition should not be initiated before 6 weeks.
I mean, when you look at both of those figures, that's significant, isn't it, in terms of volumes and in terms of time? And I guess we're repeating a little bit what we discussed with Laura as well, but some of that obviously comes down to economics. And you mentioned it there, Georgina. But economics do come into it because, let's be honest, with the recent milk price slump this last year, I've known plenty of people that sat down, done the sums, cheaper to go back to whole milk, so have gone back to whole milk in that time and not fed milk powder because of the cost of it.
And that obviously has its own challenges, doesn't it? But I don't know if we want to cover those or
which we can cover as we progress through as to why they are. But they are definitely something that, you know, is a reality. But sorry, Georgina, going on in terms of, you say those volumes there. So we've talked about where it is. Where is it going forward? Or Juliette, if you want to add to it at this point.
So I think we started with LifeStart. So LifeStart's our calf and heifer rearing best practice platform. That is the platform that we use to promote and publish a lot of our research, and also to make sure that research is then turned into solutions and protocols and stuff. So I think to give you an idea of where science has come from, Juliette and her team, since 2015, have had 55 published papers as part of the LifeStart platform. So there's amazing calf research coming out all the time, and we need to make sure that we're translating that. So if we went back 10 or 15 years, Andrew, you're right, there were people feeding 2 litres of feed, 3 litres of feed. As I mentioned, even a few years ago, we were talking about 65% of farmers feeding 6 litres or less. That has improved. We do have a lot of farmers feeding 8 litres. I would say our minimum feed curve now is 8 litres, but we are massive advocates for ad lib feeding. So feed to appetite. If they're clearing buckets at 8 litres, feed another litre, feed another half a litre. And there's the balance there I appreciate with not wanting to waste milk or have a high level of refusals. But then I think we start to feed more milk, and that's what we talk a lot about. I think that's Juliette and I talk about feeding more litres and the amazing research that's come out of that. And we can list some of the benefits later on. But when you go to feed more milk, you have to feed the right milk. You cannot feed a poor quality milk at a high volume because you're not going to get the response that you expect. And that's where I think, Juliette, your research went next, wasn't it? We now know we need to restore sort of the biological marker for feed volume. And now we need to understand what we need to feed at that volume to be safe, to get the growth rates we need, and also to elicit the health support. I think that's really clear to say. We're nutritionists. There's a huge correlation between calf nutrition and calf health. We're definitely working and collaborating with vets, and that's super important. But I think many vets will agree that if you get calf nutrition right, then calf health follows as well. Then it was moving away from volume and moving on to composition, and that's where Juliette started her work looking at fat inclusion, and that was the next step for us.
Yes, indeed, and there is another point also that is important to insist on. If we look at international conferences or at recent literature, it's considered that 8 liters per day is not an enhanced feeding plan. It's considered as moderate, and anything below 8 liters at 150 grams per liter is considered as calves being undernourished. And as we go to ad libitum feeding, it becomes crucial to balance the composition of the milk replacer, because if we feed ad libitum levels of milk replacers that present large macronutrient imbalances, that can pose immediate challenges to the calf, like, for example, digestive upset, but also metabolic problems.
Okay, and it's interesting what you talk about, like feeding for immunity and whatever. It just made me think it's never spoken about in calves in this way. And you're starting to hear it very limited in cows. But the fact that, when you have a sick cow, it's the amount of glucose it takes, the amount of energy it takes for that cow to get over that sickness, and therefore that affects production, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I was thinking about this only the other day because it's been ticking around in my brain for a little bit, that why has nobody sort of made this in the same way, or discussed it in the same way, maybe I should say. It's no different for a calf, is it? If you want it to grow, and if it's not got the energy, something's going to give. And if it's going to be, it might be its health, because it's not got the energy to provide the maximum resilience or immunity to whatever the challenge is, then that's when you're going to get that breakdown.
It's that the energy required to actually drive that immune system, isn't it? It's we don't realize how immense that really is.
And also in terms of development of the calves. And in the Netherlands, we conducted our a live start experiment where calves were either fed 4 or 8 liters in the pre-weaning phase at the same concentration of 150 grams per liter. And we found that this had really long-term consequences on the milk production in the subsequent lactations. So we found that calves that were fed 8 liters per day, they were producing 1.8 kilograms per day more corrected milk for fat and protein during the second lactation, and they had a 50% higher probability to reach the third lactation, which means that there was a big reduction of the culling rate. And this is explained by the phenomenon of metabolic programming, where stimuli in early life can have long-term effects on the metabolism.
And that's really important, isn't it, these days, when we're looking at carbon footprint as to the longevity of our cows in our herd.
And those figures are significant. It makes me come back to, I remember when I first met Georgina, and probably heard Georgina speak, was talking about those queen bees and the epigenetics. And I mean, obviously from our own point of view, we've done a lovely podcast about the epigenetics since, and it just all ties in nicely. But I guess while we're talking about this, we should just at least briefly talk about getting the basics right, really, as well, isn't it? I mean, yes, all of that's got to go right, but you don't have to have the shiniest shed. It's about making sure your management is right. So whether it's excellent colostrum management in terms of volumes and in terms of quality, the hygiene, ventilation, housing design comes into it. But as I say, it doesn't have to be the shiniest shed. It's just got to be right. And making sure you've got good stockmanship on there. I mean, have I missed any of the basics that really ought to be people we should talk about, or do you think that covers most of the things we need to?
No, I think that's a really good point that you make, Andrew. And around nutrition, and this is something I know we talk about quite a lot at Trouw Nutrition, but actually offering adequate nutrition, higher than a moderate level of nutrition, is kind of your insurance policy, because sheds aren't perfect. Calf rearing isn't perfect. Pathogen loads are always going to be there. It would be great if we find at some point, sometime, a complete cure for some of these pathogens we find in the calf shed. But in the meantime, we just need to make those calves as robust and resilient as we can. You can never talk about calf nutrition without talking about colostrum. You can't talk about calf nutrition without talking about volume of milk. But sheds, ventilation, stockmanships. I mean, Juliette, a lot of her work at Trouw Nutrition has been based on electrolytes. And I think that has had to change a lot of the narrative in the industry. And you mentioned sick calves. We can't stop feeding sick calves, but that's always been the tradition, hasn't it? So I think we've learned a lot as we've come along. There's still a lot to learn, but I think getting the basics right, being consistent, having protocols, measuring as well, has a huge part to play. But I really strongly believe nutrition can be that sort of insurance policy. If you feed a bit more, it can help support perhaps more challenges in a shed or more challenges with ventilation. I'm not saying it's going to cure everything, but I really do feel like it can offer a great support to calves as well.
So when you were saying earlier that if we're going to feed more, we need to feed the right milk powder, should we perhaps start that conversation about, well, what makes up the right milk powder?
Yeah, and I think one thing I'll just say, and then I'll definitely pass this to Juliette's absolute area of expertise, but I think one thing to remember is that calves are born with limited energy reserves. They have 3% body fat at birth. We feed colostrum. Colostrum is 40 to 45% fat, highly digestible. We are aware of the fatty acid profile of colostrum. And then historically, we've moved them to a calf milk replacer. And historically, we've moved them to a low energy or lower fat calf milk replacer. So it's a massive energy drop. There's a huge energy gap. And that's where Juliette's work started, I think, looking at, as she mentioned earlier, if we're going to feed more, what does the biological, what does Mother Nature, what does that biological reference tell us that we should be feeding?
And that's an important point to move on to, I guess, is I'm just, again, thinking back to the conversation with Laura, it's understanding the profile of the fat, isn't it? Not all fats are equal, not all fats are the same. And I know in that one, we had the discussion about why we use palm and coconut, because it's the one that closely matches the fatty acid profile. But I know, and I suppose this goes on to some of Juliette's work from, if I've got this right, obviously one of the things that's missing is it's the C4 fats, isn't it? And I'm guessing that's where a lot of your work has come in. Historically, why has that not been in a milk powder? And you've obviously got there now, but what benefits does that bring to a milk powder that, again, it's all replicating nature? I suppose that's a whole different discussion. Well, why not then feed milk in that case? But Juliette, tell us a little bit more about this and where it's gone to from and where to.
So I think that in the industry, there is a strong idea that fat is bad for calves, and that if we increase the fat in a milk replacer, they will get diarrhea, which does not make sense when we look at the composition of bovine whole milk. But I think this comes from the fact that we used to have a lot in the industry formulas, milk replacer formulas that were really optimized for cost and not for quality of the overall composition, low skim milk powder, but also the fat was not balanced properly. And it is true that if we increase the inclusion of a fat that is not well formulated, then calves will get diarrhea. And that's very well described in literature. And that's why when we increase the fat, it's crucial that that fat must be extremely well formulated in terms of fatty acid profile, but also triglyceride structure, and also all the technological aspects of the fat incorporation in the powder are also crucial. And technologically, this is very difficult to do. So it's not something that every company can do. So it's just easier to feed high lactose milk replacer because lactose is lactose. Calves can digest lactose even at high level. So it's a much safer option if we are not able to properly formulate the fat.
So standard milk powder as it was, what was the sort of the spread of the fats? Was it like, I don't know, C12 to C20, and you've then sort of filled in some of the gap below? How does that compare to what the spread is on natural? Milk, normal milk, then milk,
whole milk.
Normal milk.
So whole milk or the milk fat is actually the most complex of all natural fat. It contains 400 different fatty acids, and it's not well known what each of them are doing, and it's very difficult to study them in isolation. So what we do is that we try to match the overall fatty acid profile, and it's the same thing that is done with the infant formula. They also work with blends of palm and coconut oil. And then roughly, if you want to balance the overall ratio for the medium chain and the long chain and also other sorts of fatty acid, we need 35% coconut oil, not less, and 65% palm. And that allows us to have a balanced profile that will have an excellent digestibility if the fat is properly incorporated in the powder. We identified that some fatty acids were missing because they only exist in the milk of mammalian species. And for example, if we take calves and small ruminants, we identified that there was a gap with the short chain, so the butyric acid, and also the caproic acid, which is a medium chain fatty acid. And there is extensive literature showing that those two fatty acids are really important for the development of the gut, the intestines, the rumen, for the immune system, for the insulin sensitivity. So this is really crucial, but technologically, it's very hard to restore those fatty acids in a milk replacer because we can't extract them from milk fat. So we must work with compounds like sodium butyrate or with tributyrene that will cause olfactive problems to the powder. So in the industry, it's common to find sodium butyrate, but at very low amounts. And we developed a patented technology that allows us to restore a natural level of C4 and C6 for the future in our milk replacer products. And we found that it was hugely beneficial for calves in terms of development, in terms of health, and also for the metabolism.
Again, it comes back to health, doesn't it?
Yes. So the biggest effect we observed, initially we focused a lot on the rumen development because we observed that 5-week-old calves that did not have access to solid feed would have a more developed rumen, which is very interesting because, again, it goes against what we think of the development of the gut of a calf. And that has to do with the type of butyrate that we were feeding. So we are very excited and we are really focusing on that. But actually the biggest and the most consistent effect we get is on health, gut health and respiratory health.
So I guess if the gut is healthy, it's able to absorb those nutrients better and everything else. So I guess you can see why that perhaps has such an impact.
Yes, and we know from literature that there is a strong link between diarrhea and respiratory disease. So calves that had a diarrhea episode are 2.5 times more likely to develop BRD.
I didn't know that.
The gut-lung axis.
Yes.
Every day is a school day. So any calf that has scours has a much stronger chance of getting respiratory diseases as well.
And in some references, it's even 3 times higher likelihood to develop a respiratory disease. And this is because the mucosa of the gut and the lung are connected. So the mucosa is connected, but also the immune system of both. And that's why we see this strong effect. Or that's what we suspect. And we will now invest in that in our research program to properly understand what are the biological pathways.
I mean, that's quite significant, isn't it? So it really shows that, again, like you're talking about, you can't feed high volumes of poor quality powder. What a difference it makes. I mean, immediately you're thinking about gut development, rumen development, all of these things. And not even in my head was I thinking, what does that effect have on the rest of the calf? And in terms of the lungs and all of these kinds of things. And I know, take it a step further. I know I've quoted it before, but I know I heard Alex back at a conference maybe 2 summers ago now, is it? I think. And he basically went, well, if you get a calf and pneumonia, you might as well just get rid of it then and there. And the gasp in the room, but I know what he was saying in terms of the first loss is your biggest. And like usually those that suffer like bad pneumonia they struggle, don't they? Once they calve down, they struggle because they've not got that development.
And actually, the lung scanning is used in some countries as a criteria to select replacement heifers. So it's not just about how sick they are going to be, how much medication will be used for respiratory disease, but it's also the long-term effect for the whole production system.
Is that, yeah, because lung scanning is starting to take off here, really, isn't it? It's not, I don't think every vet practice offers it yet, but it's slowly starting to take off here more and more. And I know it was somewhere recently, I'm trying to think where it was. And they were sort of saying, that the lung scanning had picked up some damage they weren't even aware of. If people are then using that as a determining factor for which of your replacements and which of your not, it just shows it all ties in significantly, doesn't it?
I just want to pick up on this gut health and gut development bit, because obviously that's something that when we historically thought of feeding more milk replacers, we were worried about that gut and rumen development, that because it's then eating less concentrate and therefore we're not getting that gut development. So this is obviously really quite defining in that actually it helps us to be able to feed that higher milk volume, but still get our rumen development that we really need.
Yeah, and I do think that's a really important point, because we've now talked quite a lot about fat composition, and I think just to touch on when we talk about diarrhea and pneumonia, when you look at what are the biggest challenges in the calf shed, they are diarrhea and pneumonia. When you look at incidence levels across Europe, I think the incidence level of diarrhea is around 15 to 20% of calves. And we know that a case of diarrhea can be 60 to 100 euros, even if and that excludes mortality. So if you lose a calf, the cost will be higher. Like Julia said, the risk of developing BRD is then 2 to 3 times higher. We know that the respiratory disease incidence is 10 to 15% of calves. I think that's a fairly low incidence as well, I think a lot of us may say. And we know that the cost of respiratory disease is 80 to 150 euros per case of respiratory disease. But then actually the impact on the pen mates, so if they're in a group of 10, is 20 to 40 euros per pen mate. So all of a sudden, with a group of 10 calves with one clinically sick calf, you can be looking at 260 to 500 euros. So when we talk about return on investment, and we're talking about feeding more milk, and I think we need to go back and touch on feeding more energy in a sec, because I think that's really important, because that shows massive benefits. But actually, all of a sudden, if you have big health impacts, you can have some big cost savings too. So actually, that extra 200, 300 pounds per tonne of milk replacer, when you work it back, maybe 15 quid per calf, could actually, when you compare it to reducing your pneumonia incidence, reducing your diarrhea incidence, the return on investment is absolutely there. And that's before we start to look at some of the benefits as well. Because if you start to look at, for example, the benefits of feeding more milk, Juliette mentioned our trial. We refer to it as our Kemptonsoft trial, but it was published, I think, last year in the Journal of Dairy Science. And we fed heifer calves either 4 litres or 8 litres. But one of our researchers actually quoted it as one of the most impactful data sets for those also interested in sustainability of dairy production. So we've talked a little bit about disease costs, but when you start to look at greater milk performance in in first lactation and subsequent lactation, we saw sort of a greater milk performance of the second lactating cows, of being 1.8 kilos of fat protein corrected milk higher, an extra 50 grams of milk fat yield. And we saw a difference in first service conception rate, and the likelihood to be culled before the 3rd, 4th or 5th calving was halved when the calves were fed 8 litres compared to 4. So if you wanted to express that in sort of an overall productivity way, you could calculate it back to being an improvement in performance by 4.2 kilos of animal per day. So once you calculate that up, so all of a sudden, I know I mentioned right at the beginning, we need to think about calculating return on the investment. But feeding more milk gives you investment, moving towards feeding more energy. And this is where Juliette looked at increasing the fat inclusion, because increasing the fat inclusion reduces the lactose inclusion. And that's the biggest benefit. Because I think, Juliette, you found there's a huge impact when you feed a high lactose product. And when you try and feed a high volume of a high lactose product, that's when you can really start to come into problems. And I think that's a challenge that I see. And I know my colleagues see, is that people will challenge us that actually calves won't drink 8 litres, they won't drink 9 litres. They will if you feed them the right milk replacer. If you're trying to feed them a high lactose milk replacer at high volumes, they're not going to drink it because of the impact on lactose and osmotic pressure. And I'm sure Juliette can explain that way better than I can. But I think it's having that fat inclusion, increasing that fat inclusion is massively important. And then, like Juliette said, that altering that fat composition is really taking it to the next level as well.
What I was going to say is, sorry, before Juliette probably gives us the better answers, while we say it's not about growth, we should remember it is as much about growth at this stage, because your greatest return on investment is when they are calves. That's when most of their growth happens. That's when you're they're still effectively a monogastric. That's when they'll have the best feed conversion. You want to be growing them as much as you can while they are on milk, because if you don't, it will cost you a lot more to make that gain later on, because they don't have the same feed conversion efficiency. They won't respond in the same way. So yes, while we're all talking about health, which is incredibly important, don't get me wrong, and I still go back to say Laura said this 3 years ago, we can't forget that is when they have their most significant developments. And if we don't get that right, it's just setting them all up. And I suppose wearing my cow signals hat, we were talking about sustainability. Again, it's if we push for that 23, was it cow signals? If they carve at 23 months, so we can extend the lactations to 5 lactations, which again, all of this is what you're saying will help do. It reduces your methane by 30% across the farm. Well, surely that's a big tick for everybody and everything for calves, cows, whatever. I'll stop ranting now, sorry, and let's go back to Juliette to give us a better description of what.
Just before Juliette jumps in for fat levels and composition there, I'll just touch on that, Andrew, because that's super important. And just to add from our work, if you apply lifestyle principles on farm, so you feed a higher level of milk, it's been shown through a life cycle assessment, so an LCA, to have the potential to decrease climate change potential of a dairy cow in kilos of CO2 equivalents by 6%. So that's massive. So I'm a huge advocate of sustainability. It's something that we talk a lot about at Trouw Nutrition. But for me, calves and heifers are the foundation of a sustainable dairy production system. If you get your calf and heifer rearing right, you can have massive impacts. And I think 6% is more than achievable. I think in practice on farm, when we can change a few different things, milk type, growth rates, age at first calving, you can definitely achieve more than 6%. And we know that is a KPI for a lot of milk buyers and a focus for a lot of milk buyers going forward. So yeah, I think sustainability is super important.
Well, I remember being at one of your Trouw conferences and a couple of farmers who were speaking saying, I'm getting fed up of hearing the word sustainability. And as soon as somebody said, well, how about we talk about profitability? They went, there we go. So anybody listening, think of it as profitability. If you get your heifers right, you'll increase your profitability because you won't need the replacements. You'll get better production, and it all starts from that moment.
They're intrinsically linked, aren't they?
They definitely are. So sorry, Juliette, we keep butting in and not giving you a chance, but we were going to talk about lactose compared to fats and various other bits and pieces. So please do tell us about them.
So actually, before the lactose and the fat, there is another point that's very important, and that goes back to the growth you mentioned, how important it is to have good growth rate with the calves. So often in the industry, I hear that the composition of the milk from dairy breeds is no longer adapted to the physiological requirements of the calves because of the selection that took place. But actually, the milk of dairy breed was mostly selected on the milk yield and not so much on the milk composition. And when we compare the milk from a Holstein to a beef breed, we see that there are a lot of commonalities. They are high in fat, they have a low osmolality, the minerals are quite similar, so it's very balanced. And the proof that that whole milk is actually adequate for a Holstein calf is that there are data in literature, published data showing that when a Holstein calf is nursing by the dam, in the first 14 days, the ADG will be 1.2 kilos per day. And this is definitely not something that we commonly see on farms. And in our research facility, we also had a trial where we fed 2 times 4 liters of whole milk. And the ADG in the first 14 days was 1 kilo a day. So I think that there is also a problem with the reference that we have for a good growth in the industry because we are happy with much less. And also in some papers, calves are fed very little. So one problem is how much they are being fed, and the other one is what they are being fed.
Okay, so in turn, we've discussed volume. So what are they being fed then, Juliette? What's the difference between high lactose and high fat?
So regarding the high lactose and the high fat, there can be when we have big macronutrient imbalances. It has been well described in infant nutrition. That will lead to short-term problem what we see with the calves. And for the long term, we have the infant nutrition work to explain what type of problem we may have. So in the short-term problem, when we have low fat, it means we have high lactose. because the formula has to add up to 100%. And lactose is osmotically active. And because having low fat lowers the energy density, we tend to increase the concentration to still provide energy per liter of milk replacer. And that leads to osmolality that are above 450 milliosmol per kilogram, while whole milk and the milk of any mammalian species will be around 350 milliosmol per kilogram. And we know from the infant nutrition that we should not go above 450 milliosmol per kilogram. So if in a farm we are concentrating a milk that is high in lactose, that's a risky practice because hypertonic liquid feed will slow down the abomasal emptying, and that can be a risk for bloating. And I know in some countries they are adept of the once a day feeding at very high concentration, for example, 200 grams per liter. That's very risky. And also we can see diarrhea because it's a feed that's more osmotically active. So if it's coupled, for example, with bad housing conditions. So I think osmolality alone is not necessarily something that will cause problem on a farm, but it's an extra risk factor. So if this adds up with other problems on the farm, that becomes a risky practice. So as Georgina always say, we should try to control the control level, and this is one.
So Juliette, you mentioned a little bit about lactose and some of the fats. You mentioned if you feed too much lactose, it has not benefits, it has an effect. What are some of these effects of feeding too much lactose long term? And maybe if you were feeding the fats long term instead, what are the benefits that these may bring?
So when it comes to the long-term effects, so we know that differences in milk feeding plane, high plane versus low plane will affect the long-term performance of dairy cows. We don't have such data with the milk composition. But if we look at the work that was done in infant nutrition, that link has been very well established. So in the 80s, the infant formulas used to be way too high in their protein content. And that's because they wanted to match the requirement for essential amino acids of infants, but using dairy protein. So they had good intention. And that has led to a high protein level in infant formula. And they observed that babies that were fed those high protein infant formula, they were growing faster in infancy, which is typically something that we would view as very positive with calves. And we see it in some research papers that when we have a very high protein milk replacer and sometimes also high in lactose, that calves can be numerically heavier. So we see this as positive. But it was shown in infant nutrition that this was causing a negative effect on the whole body metabolism. So those infants that grew faster because of those high protein infant formula, they had a much higher risk of obesity at age 8, in teenagehood, in adulthood, and that was coupled with more risk of cardiovascular problems and metabolic syndrome. And if we make the parallel with calves, so we can really wonder what are we doing when we are feeding milk replacer with very low fat, because it means that then we have too much lactose or too much protein in some cases, in some countries. And what has been described in infant nutrition is that this will promote the adipogenic activity. So there will be a higher potential to become fat for life. And we know that this is a major issue with dairy cows in general for the management. So we really have to question ourselves when we are feeding such milk replacers when it's for replacement heifers.
So from what you're saying, does it sound like you follow human infant nutrition quite a lot and then go, there's a good idea, I better go test that on a few cows or a few calves?
So I think indeed it's very healthy to look at other species because sometimes they may be more advanced or they may have more capabilities in some areas, for example, long-term follow-up. So I look at both calf literature, human literature, sometimes also piglets, because, for example, the osmolality aspects have been widely studied all across species. So I think it's very healthy and it's important to also look at infant nutrition because also they have different objectives. For them, it's health, it's healthy development, and it's typically aspects that we would like to integrate in calf nutrition. And one other aspect that we observed with high lactose milk replacer is that, and that was mentioned by Georgina, is that those calves are hungry. And it's not just related with the energy density, because if we correct by the concentration for the same energy density, we see that calves fed high lactose milk replacer, they are very active. They have a very strong anticipation of their meal. We see that in the morning. And we also observe that before a meal, their leptin levels are very low as compared to cows fed high fat, but also high protein. So the lactose specifically poses problem with the regulation of society. And that's a bit sad if we look at calves that are already fed low plain, and then this make them feel hungrier. And we can also make the parallel with children who are drinking very sweet drinks or soda. They may have a rush, be very active, and then soon after that, they are hungry. So it's not a good way to cover the energy on a daily basis. And we see that it's also more stressful during weaning.
But I suppose, as you answered the question, it all ties in. I think you said earlier on, is it mammalian milk is quite, the makeup of it across species is fairly standard. So actually, again, it probably ties in nicely. If it works for infants, it's probably going to work for calves. It's going to work for piglets. It's all kind of very related, just maybe being looked at from a different point of view. And having had to combi feed both children, and looking at the cost of milk powder, and that's obviously several years ago now, geez, that costs an arm and a leg. So somebody's making some money about it. It makes calf milk powder look cheap in comparison.
I think, Andrew, it's a really good point, because it just brings us back to using Mother Nature as a biological reference. And in calf feeding for so many years, we went away from using Mother Nature as a biological reference. The calf milk replacer industry was built on using byproducts, which was great at the time. But actually now we need to focus on the requirements of that calf, and what we can do to grow a robust and resilient calf. And using Mother Nature, looking at that biological reference, is massively important, I think, for future research.
And I think it's probably not only nutrition where we look at human aspects. I think sort of putting my animal behaviour hat on, when I did my MSc in animal behaviour, it was actually in the human psychology department, that actually it's no different. We're all social mammals, and actually we had a lot to understand from animal behavior from human behavior. So I think it's across the board. Can I just take a step back before you go away from osmolality, because I think that's probably a word that isn't in common usage actually on farm. So can we explain what that really means? What's actually happening in the gut when that osmolality is over that 450?
Sure. So osmolality is the concentration of osmotically active particles in solution. And that will affect how water is absorbed in the body. And adult animals can make adaptive responses to that. But for neonates, it will be very aggressive to the gut. It can impair gut integrity. We have shown it in a trial. So, for example, when we talk about the link between the gut and the lung, I'm sure I would hypothesize that if calves are fed very hypertonic liquid feed, I'm sure we can also maybe see other problems that can happen in those animals. So it is a very aggressive practice for the gut. And in some cases, it can cause diarrhea, because the gut will always try to dilute the osmolality of the gut content to 300 for better absorption. But in this process, if calves are less than 3 weeks of age, they may not be able to do so, and that can cause diarrhea, osmotic diarrhea. And I think also osmotic diarrhea is an open gate for infectious diarrhea, because we are lowering their local defenses.
So we also sort of perhaps even dehydrating calves in that situation as well.
So I don't think we are dehydrating them, because eventually they will still be able to absorb. And we mostly sell high lactose milk replacer, and we don't see diarrhea as being a systemic problem with a high quality, high lactose milk replacer, but it's a risk practice. So in some cases, in some farms, if we concentrate it too much, if we try to feed very high volume, it can become a problem. And that's why increasing the fat and lowering the lactose is safer.
And as you say, makes sense. It's what's got the best energy density? Fat.
Yes, it's much more energy dense.
Yeah, it's no different with a dairy cow. If you're lacking a bit of energy when you're doing the nutrition, stick in some, again, the right fat with the right profile, but stick in a fat to increase that energy density when you can't feed any more starch or whatever it happens to be.
And there's a lot of published data around the benefits to feeding more fat. So not just increasing lactose, for example, but increasing fat has been shown to have multiple benefits. There's a paper that looks at calves fed a high level of fat having a small intestine that was 8 to 10% heavier. And we know, therefore, it will have a greater capacity to digest, for example, and absorb nutrients. We know there's a difference in fecal scores. So if you feed a high level of fat, the fecal scores, or there's a lower risk of abnormal fecal scores within those first few weeks. There's also the welfare aspect to consider, which I do think is really important. And we at Trouw Nutrition talk about it a lot. But when you look at things like hunger-related behaviours, unrewarded visits to the feeder, when you feed a high-fat milk replacer, that changes. There are less unrewarded visits. And when you look at treatment rates, therapeutic interventions, if you feed a high-fat milk replacer, the therapeutic interventions are lower. So even just feeding more milk and then feeding more of a high-fat milk, there's all these benefits listed in the literature, but still people are hesitant because they will challenge us with high levels of milk and high energy, won't eat starter, they won't wean. And all of those things really are myths we need to bust. We know if we feed a high level of milk, the milk that's designed to be fed at high levels, calves will consume the volume. But also if you wean appropriately, you can manage that weaning transition. Juliette said right at the beginning how we wean reared calves versus calves left on the dam is very different. So you have to have a planned weaning approach, weaning over at least 3 or 4 weeks, making sure that you are taking it down in steps and making sure they're eating at least 2.5-3 kilos starter before you take milk away is massively important. But you still see those challenges in the industry. You still see don't feed too much milk, don't feed high levels of fat. And I really think if you get everything right, then it's absolutely the winning combination. If calves aren't feeding enough, the milk replacer is not correct. If you're not able to get starter feed into calves, you need to think about a weaning protocol. I think there isn't a blueprint for rearing calves, is there? There absolutely isn't. But there are some fundamentals that are evidence-based that have shown short, medium and long-term benefits. And feeding more milk and feeding more energy are 2 clear ones for me.
And if I remember right, your fats are at 25%, is that right? Now, is that because that's the optimum, or is that because that's when the cost benefit is best? So, for argument's sake, if I turned to you and said, well, can I feed 30%? Is it a case of, yeah, that'd be really good, but actually the cost benefit isn't there? Or why is 25% the figure that is in the peeled powders?
Yep. So our energized calf milk range, which was the high fat range that we came out with in 2018, are 25% fat. Our latest generation of energized calf milks that were brought out over the last 2 years, that include Lactofat Pro or the fatty acid technology that Juliette's been discussing, they are 26 or 27% fat, depending upon which area of Europe you're listening in. And to be completely honest, Juliette very much indicated, I think, in one of her earlier answers, is that it's all to do with technology. I think our focus at Trouw Nutrition is to restore what Mother Nature intended to, or to even do better than Mother Nature intended to. So we are absolutely trying to strive for high fat. We know whole milk on a dry matter basis would be 32% fat, but it's all around the processing technologies. So how that fat is processed, so how it's refined, deodorized, how it's homogenized, how it's spray dried, has a massive impact on the digestibility and the availability to that calf. So you can have 2 25% fat powders, but their digestibility and the end results will be quite different. And as Juliette said, the technology to spray dry a high fat skim product is much more advanced, much more difficult than a high lactose whey-based product. So I think it's the processing technology to develop the fatty acid technology that we're now including in milk replacers. So the shorter chain fatty acids, the benefits that we are seeing, we had to basically go back to the drawing board and look at how we did that. And that's why it's patent pending technology, because spray drying and meeting the minimum level to get the results that we want is really important. So it's all around processing technology. So hopefully as our processing technology improves, we will continue to lift. DCM came out at 25%. It's now 26, 27. In the future, I'd love that to be higher, obviously mindful of the market and where we are sitting economically as well. But yeah, I think, Juliette, it's fair to say that it's processing technology and making sure the fat is in a milk replacer in a digestible way or a digestible form is less of a limiting factor than it used to be for our factories, but it still can be a huge limiting factor for some.
And when it comes to the fat level in milk replacer, all my PhD studies that have been published were done at about 30% fat. So we can go higher to get closer to whole milk in the future.
Okay, yeah. So that's interesting. As you say, it's more the technology's holding us back than it is anything else at the moment. But as we fill in those gaps, like we have with the short chains, it will likely see those continue to rise.
So actually, we can already, technologically, we can already be at around 30%. We see that the calves tolerate it really well.
Georgina and Juliette, earlier you spoke about how your milk powders are based on coconut and palm. What's the reasoning behind that? Because obviously, when you look at other milk powder labels, could be soya, there's all sorts of different ingredients that could be used. Can you talk us through why you use the coconut and palm?
Yes, so our objective is to really mimic as much as we can with the fat sources available, the fatty acid profile of bovine whole milk, and we identified that a ratio of palm and coconut was allowing us to get close to that profile. And it has been reported in literature that when we have large imbalances in the fatty acid profile, that can cause diarrhea to calves. And there is also a lot of data showing that when the oils are very unsaturated, for example, with sunflower oil, cottonseed, soya oil, that will lead to a marked accumulation of cholesterol in the blood and in the organs of the calves. So in terms of metabolism, this is a problem. And we see that with rapeseed, although the calves are doing very well, we start to observe such response. So we think that they don't do well with a high level of insaturation. And because of this accumulation of cholesterol, there is a big loss of feed efficiency. And the further we go in the amount of polyunsaturated fatty acids, the worse this problem is going to get. And when we have high inclusion of corn and these types of oil, then we also see diarrhea. So this is completely not adequate for calves. And today we consider that the best fat combination is palm and coconut, or coconut and lard. And coconut can also be substituted by insect oil. But it's not possible to have milk replacer without coconut or insect oil because it means that the medium chains fatty acids are going to be lacking. So that's a problem. And personally, I also like lard because it's a very saturated fat source and it allows us to get even closer to the triglyceride structure of milk fat.
I've not come across lard before as a source. So can you perhaps talk us through perhaps why we don't see that here in the UK?
So I think it's for historical reasons regarding regulation. It was banned in Europe. Now it's not the case. So we start to see it in some countries again. So I think it's an interesting fat source that may become more common in the future because we also have concerns sometimes with palm oil, with sustainability. So this is a nice alternative, which also leads to really good results.
So we've been sort of talking there about what whole milk, fat volume, fat percentages, etc., versus our milk replacer. Is it worth just having that little discussion about the whole milk versus milk replacer? Particularly, we heard Andrew say that in the current economic climate, there has been a slight drive, perhaps I was going to say backwards, to using whole milk. Can we perhaps hear your views on that?
Yeah, I think currently, economically, depending upon where you are, farm gate milk price is a challenge. We know milk replacers are expensive, particularly high skim, high fat quality milk replacers, and they are an expensive product to buy. I don't think we'll ever argue against that, but it's the value that you can achieve from feeding a milk replacer, which hopefully we've touched on during some of these discussions already. And the the discussion around whole milk or calf milk replacer is something that happens in the industry when we're under periods of pressure, and rightly so. So we know that whole milk is has a higher natural fat value, so 32%. We know that it is completely digestible. However, and this is very much farm dependent, we also know that the consistency of whole milk can be a challenge with regards to dry matter. We also know the consistency of availability can be a challenge. So I think we can't forget around the fact that Calves loves consistency, but also I think logistics, feeding whole milk isn't easy. Storing it, cooling it, heating back up, and also the disease risk. I think that is a massive challenge that we do have with Johne's and TB, mycoplasma. There are a lot of pathogens, not necessarily directly into the milk, but they can also be fecal transmitted through feces as well. And I think that's a really interesting one. I suppose from my point of view, it has to be dependent on your farm and your situation, depending upon your farm milk price, what your labour availability is. But I do think calf milk replacers offers a consistent composition, a controlled composition, an opportunity for optimization with regards to feed curve. You're not focused on availability, and it should be disease free as well. So it minimizes that risk. So I completely understand the pressures that we are under, but I do think it needs to be looked at rather than price per litre. It needs to be looked at of some of the things that we've discussed today. Pasteurization also has quite a big cost, high electricity, high water usage. So you need to be adding that cost onto your price per litre. And also I encourage people to calculate energy intakes of calves, try and correlate that with an expected performance of calves, and make your decisions based on more information, not just purely pence per litre or euro cent per litre. I think one thing I wanted to share is our researcher, one of Juliette's colleagues, is from a family farm, has a family farm in France. They've always used ad lib whole milk, and they have moved to our latest calf milk replacer recently, and they've seen huge improvements in diarrhea and calf performance. So even moving from ad lib whole milk, we're now able to, with the latest innovations and the latest calf milk replacers, offer something that is as good as, if not better. And I think that's a really nice story, because often with ad lib whole milk, if it's clean and disease free, you think, well, actually, am I going to get any performance benefits from a calf milk replacer? But one of our colleagues actually did. So I think that's a really interesting thing to think about as well.
And one limitation also with whole milk feeding is that sometimes when a farm is feeding high quality whole milk, it's at low plane, because whole milk, of course, is economically important for the farm. But even when calves are fed whole milk, they should be fed whole milk at high plane.
So I'm sat here thinking that imitation is a sincere form of flattery. Since you say Energize has been milk, that powder has been copied across the industry, I would say. How as a business, or how do you feel as that, or as a researcher, Juliette, I guess that must make you think, well, I'm doing something right because everybody's copying my lead.
I think from a LifeStart perspective, when we set out with LifeStart, our ultimate aim was to have a platform that could facilitate the sharing of the latest research. So when we build a platform like that, Juliette and her team are widely publishing their work. The overall aim is hopefully that the industry can improve together. So I think that's one of our first things. And I do think we did launch Energized Calf Milk into the market within Europe in 2018. Some markets within Europe were heavily skim-based already. Some weren't, like GB and Ireland were very much still based on whey-based seeding. I think the products spoke for themselves and the performance spoke to themselves. Yes, there's a lot of high fat, high skim products around there. I think my position is look for the LifeStart badge on bags. That's the evidence-based sort of criteria that we work for, and we'll continue to evolve. And you can see now, since Energized Calf Milk has come out, and we're now talking about fatty acid technology, and Juliette's brilliant work is really moving us forward. And those results that we are seeing on farm are really exciting. For me, as if calves are being fed better and they're being fed more energy, yeah, absolutely. Trouw Nutrition are the originators of the science and the originators of high-fat milk replacers, but we'll continue to evolve. We're not stopping now. I think Juliette's just getting started.
So that leads us really nicely into what are you currently researching, and what would be your, if money was no object, where would you look to take your research?
So currently we are still working a lot on the fatty acids, especially to understand the biological pathway, and we would like to collaborate also with some universities. And we also started a project on the protein, because we would like to highlight the importance of high skim milk powder for the development of calves. And now we just got wonderful results. So we had a group of calves with no skim milk versus only 35%, while it should be around 50. And by the end of the weaning, there were 11 kilos difference between the two groups. So having skim milk powder really makes a huge difference, and we want to understand how that affects the insulin and the whole body composition and development of the calves. But again, coming back to the fat, I think we are just scratching the surface of everything we can harvest, especially with the short and the medium fatty acids. Medium chain, sorry.
And I think it's also important to mention, we talk a lot about dairy heifers. I think the industry talks a lot about dairy heifers. But one of Juliette's team members is doing a huge amount of work on dairy beef now. So looking at those systems, we know when you look at calves hitting the ground within Europe now, that a huge proportion is of beef origin. So we need to optimize the rearing of those calves. And that's something Juliette's got a PhD student working on it. And that's an area of exploration for us, because yes, a calf is a calf, but their long-term outcomes are different. And therefore, we're trying to understand how we can optimize feeding a dairy heifer, but also a dairy beef animal too. So I think there'll be more research and more things to come under that as well.
Now, as I say, do you think then that means ultimately you might have a range of dairy milk powders and beef milk powders, because there'll be slightly different outcomes and you're looking for slightly different, I don't know, growths or developments?
I think we are working on understanding what may be needed. Obviously, they're two completely different systems, and dairy beef is not integrated, is it? Some systems are semi-integrated or highly integrated, but throughout Europe, there are no super integrated systems. So understanding that is important too. Where the value comes and who owns that value is the challenge. Whereas with dairy heifers, the dairy heifer is born on the farm. If they're a replacement animal, that person rearing the calves and putting the costs in gets the value back. So that's the challenge that we have. But also, I think calves that are moving have different challenges as well. So moving at 2 or 3 weeks of age, for example, moving again at weaning, they potentially have a challenge too. But yeah, we're excited. There's a huge amount to come from Trouw Nutrition and the lifestyle platform. So I think, like Juliette says, we're only scratching the surface on what we're doing already.
It's changed so much since I'm going back probably, I don't know, 25 to 30 years ago when I used to sell milk powder, and it was, is it for beef or heifers? If it was for heifers, it was a 30 or 40% skim. And if it was for your beef, I'll have the whey powder. And things have changed so much in as I say, those 25 to 30 years. It's a totally different game.
Massively changed. But I think what you find is sometimes you go on farm and the heifers may be on a high lactose powder at 6 litres, and the beef calves may be on waste milk. And the beef calves look better than the heifers. So that's the challenge that we have, isn't it? But yeah, I think that's something for us all to think about. It's just optimizing where we can the calf nutrition for the different sectors too.
I mean, like you're saying that about waste milk. My father used to rear all of our replacements when we were still in Somerset on the cow. So if you had a high cell count cow or whatever it was, I remember when I first went as a student to work somewhere else and they were weaning at, I don't know, was it 8 to 12 weeks? I can't remember when it was. And I'm like, what? They're already half the size of the ones we've got at home, because those ones at home were just running around either in a pen or outside in a paddock with whoever the cow that was being suckled. And, they obviously did all right on it because they were huge, great things in comparisons to most others at that stage. And it just shows what a difference it makes. Okay, well, I'm starting to look at the time now, thinking it's time we start to wrap this up. So like usual, Georgina, any last words of wisdom from yourself?
I think from my point of view now, and from livestock science, if you look at what livestock science is trying to show us, we know that we can feed calves better. We know that we can feed more volume. We know that we can feed more milk. We can feed more energy. And that delivers us immediate benefits with regards to calf health. But I think now we need to think about going beyond growth. So we need to look at feeding for resilience. So we need to think about building stronger, healthier calves. And that's achieved really through smarter nutrition. So feed more milk, feed more energy, look towards now feeding for resilience. And that's when we have to start fine tuning. So that's when we're now looking at fat composition. And I think the thing that I would say is in your own calf rearing system, if you are struggling to feed enough milk, if you are struggling with a high fat milk, I would just always review what you're doing. Always think about, is the milk that I'm feeding appropriate to be fed at 8+ litres? And really, I suppose we want to translate the science into actionable steps for farmers. So I would just encourage everyone to think about evidence-based products, evidence-based solutions, and to really foster that teamwork on farm between your vet, between your nutritionist. Just ask a lot of questions, challenge the team that you're working with, and even the best units can make small steps and achieve some improvements as well.
From yourself, Juliette, any last words of wisdom?
So what we learned through our research program is that any step we take closer to the biological reference, we can harvest really big benefits on calf development and health. So I would encourage to also question the milk feeding plan, the winning strategies, and the quality of whole milk or milk replacer that are being fed on farm.
Sarah?
I think that farmers coming away from listening to this could benefit from asking themselves why they are feeding what they're currently feeding. Take a look at what they're feeding, look at the label, ask their feed rep what's in their milk powder. And above all, ask themselves, are they actually hitting the goals that they want to achieve? And if they're not, finding somebody that can help them fit that solution.
Well, I'd like to start by saying thank you to both Georgina and Juliette. It's been fantastic to have you on. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you both. And I know we say this every time, but again, we could have just kept talking about this for a lot longer. I mean, it's something we see time and time again with our guests because it's their field. The passion they show just shines through, and that's very much the case with both of you. And it's great because you say there's been a real revolution. I will call it a revolution, I think, in calf rearing in those last 10, 15 years from, the way it kind of always been and, the couple of litres and how we've moved it on and a better understanding of what's going on. And like you say, originally probably calf milk started as a byproduct, didn't it? It was how do we use this whey and ways forward. And now we're starting to actually go, actually, if we can actually make this as close as possible to the real deal, then what are the benefits? A cow produces milk for a reason, and that's to allow its calf to develop. So, this is what we're trying to do and starting to see by just those little bits like the recent developments in short chains, the development, the positive benefits have been seen from there. So it's probably little steps now, but it's still all little steps in the right direction. And we talk about this, and it's the nutrition, and we've got to get the nutrition right because it makes them more resilient. It makes them for a healthier calf. It makes better immunity because if they have the energy, they've got more chance to fight whatever is challenging them, definitely. But also we can't forget the basics about colostrum quality, about just simple general management, that if you don't get them right, no matter what you feed them, it ain't going to solve it. So, it's still go back to the basics and do the basics right. And then this will help grow and develop and do a better job. So from my point of view, again, thank you very much to both of you. It's been a pleasure. But otherwise, I guess it's a goodbye from me.
It's a goodbye and thank you from me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Arm & Hammer Animal Nutrition are pleased to support Chewing the Cud podcast. We're all in when it comes to supporting healthy, productive farm animals. Please visit ahanimalnutrition.com for more information.
Thank you for listening to the Chewing the Cud podcast, where we bring you conversations for the dairy industry produced in the southwest of England and listened to around the world. And now for the really boring bit, I'm afraid, the legal disclaimer. The information provided during this podcast has been prepared for general information purposes only and does not constitute advice. Information must not be relied upon for any purpose, and no representation or warranty is given to its accuracy, completeness, or otherwise. Any reference to other organisations, businesses or products during the podcast are not endorsements or recommendations of Chewing the Cud Limited. The views of Andrew Jones are personal and may not be the views of Chewing the Cud Limited, and the views of Sarah Bolt are personal and may not be the views of Kingshay Farming and Conservation Limited and any affiliated companies. For more information on the podcast and details of services offered by Chewing the Cud Limited, visit www.chewingthecud.com. Thank you and goodbye.